Um, there we go. The recording's going to get started. So my name is John Arroyo. I'm with Cross-Cultural Communications. I'm the Director of Cross-Cultural Communications, and we're really excited to restart this webinar series, the resources for interpreters. And we're super excited because we have Mireia Perez actually joining us today, and she has a presentation titled The Power of Niches, Creating a Customer Avatar. So I think it's going to be hugely beneficial for all of us as community interpreters. We're going to let everyone trickle in. Mireia is the expert on Mireia, but what I know is Mireia has been an interpreter for about 10 years. And February 2020, she's been a community interpreter for about 10 years. And February 2020, she launched Brand the Interpreter, which if you're not familiar with Brand the Interpreter, you should be, because it tells the stories of language professionals. It really delves in and tells our stories, what we see day in and day out in the language industry. And she does it really in a way only Mireia could do it. She really draws out their stories, and it's really been a way of enriching the interpreting profession for so many of us, the language profession. It's been a remarkable gift, but Mireia is going to get into the nuts and bolts of her background. We'd certainly love to hear from her a little bit more about her background, and then she'll get into her presentation. Thanks so much, Mireia, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be back for your first presentation in the fall. And yeah, I'm super excited to talk about today. So thank you, John. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much.
And thank you everyone for being here. It's just a pleasure to be able to be back with cross-cultural communications and being here to talk a little bit about something that maybe we've heard often about, but really don't know how to apply it specifically for community interpreters. So I appreciate the opportunity. And of course, I appreciate your support and, just you being here today with us, for this presentation. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. So just, give me a moment while I choose the right screen, because you guys should know by now how that goes. I'm going to share sound just in case. And then if I could just get a quick thumbs up, making sure that you guys can see the screen. And John, you let me know because...
Yep.
Okay, great.
Wait 1 second. Let's just doubly make sure we can see the screen. We enable chat. Just a second.
So we practice. We promise we practice, guys. All right. Let me know if you guys are good.
1 second.
Maybe in the chat, we could just... Am I here?
1 second.
Okay.
Okay, yes, we're good. We can see your screen, so go ahead. Excellent.
Very good. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I just want to make sure that, this is the hardest thing ever, guys. Talk about technical difficulties here. Which screen are you able to see? Full screen?
We see creating a customer avatar.
Let me do this again because this isn't right. This is part of what not to do when you are presenting online, by the way. So just give me a second here. I'm going to try that again. We had this all nice and set up for you guys, and then of course it doesn't work. Anyway, so I'll go ahead and get started. So today's presentation is indeed about creating a customer avatar. And as John had mentioned, I did begin as a community interpreter, and I'm using that as past tense because just recently I started a new venture, which was really bringing out the Brand the Interpreter as a company. And so there's going to be just new ventures coming up, but that doesn't mean that I'm not involved in the interpreting world still. I'm most definitely still a part of it, particularly through the podcast. As John had just mentioned, I am the host of the Brand the Interpreter podcast. And in this platform, I enjoy sharing the stories of language professionals from around the world. And so I'm very much involved in it in that sense, but also, of course, just community interpreting, where I started as a medical interpreter and then made my way into the education field. And here is really where I feel like I got my start on this whole notion of branding. I do have a communications degree, and I really wanted to apply it in a way that I could help highlight the role of the interpreter, because my experience between medical and education was completely different. It was a day and night experience. I ended up coming from a hospital that understood the role of the interpreter. And what I mean by that is medical doctors, nurses, the medical staff was trained on how to work with an interpreter. And, there was a whole onboarding and just, everything that I just felt like that was everyone's experience wherever you went to go work as an interpreter, especially if, the assessment was so accurate and so rigorous. I thought that was going to be the experience everywhere. And come to find out, in education, that's not what ended up happening. So anyway, fast forward to present day, I applied a lot of these techniques, not only as an in-house interpreter, but also outside when I was rolling out this, podcast and really trying to capture the attention of a very specific niche, which in this case is language professionals. So that's why I say interpreter, trainer, podcast host, and of course a brand enthusiast, because that is just, I love concepts that have to do with brand positioning and how to apply it to the individual. And so for today's presentation, we will be talking about an avatar. And I have this little image here with, the little dress up doll, because maybe some of you might remember one of my favorite things as a kid was to play, like there was this like dress up part, right? Like a dress up, I don't know if it was a game or, something. It was basically a doll, but in stickers. And I would be able to drag the dress or the attire or even the hairstyle, anything I wanted to, this little doll like that was on paper. It was like a little sticker, like plastic type, and really bring out, highlight the different characters or personality of this. And more than fashion, it had to do more, for me at least, with bringing out a personality type. And so depending on what I added to this little character, which, had no personality because it was just plain, depended on whatever I added to it. So if it had dark hair, if it had blonde hair, if it was wearing pants, if it was wearing a suit, that's the personality it adapted. And it's basically this whole notion of, little did I know, what I was creating was an avatar. Right? Nowadays, we know it as an avatar. And so that's why this little image here of myself in this case with this little apron looking dress. But what is an avatar? Particularly, I think in this day and age that, we're talking about avatars, and we're talking about, the different types of personalities or characteristic or traits. Believe it or not, I was pretty surprised to have seen that there was several definitions for the word avatar. Of course, if you dig a little further, you'll be able to identify that this is really where the inspiration came from. The word, the word avatar. This was where it was inspired. All you need to do is do a little bit of research, and you'll see that there's more to the word avatar than just what we're necessarily thinking. In our case, we will be talking about the avatar in this context here. We growing up, with the whole notion of that avatar, like I'd mentioned earlier, applying it to what I was playing without even knowing. And then later on, of course, it's the avatar that perhaps many of you connect with in a movie. And then later on, identifying that avatar was actually a thing in games, right? That's something that my little guy taught me. It was this game avatar in which you create your character, and the character is able to bring in features just based on what you're choosing to apply to it. Now, there's all sorts of, different characters and different games that you're able to apply this little trick to. And as you can see, even in this image, it's very realistic for some of these, characters once you start applying them. I mean, if you guys are gamers, or if you have children that are really into gaming, you'll know that this is in fact the case, that we are able to see quite a realistic character. Of course, didn't start out like this, right? But here, the idea of avatar in gaming, in creating a persona, or applying certain traits in order to create this virtual person, is really where many think about an avatar. Many create an avatar in gaming, or think about the avatar in the movie. I'm curious to know how many of you have identified the avatar either by means of the movie, or just, an avatar. If you've heard it, if you could add in the chat, how many of you actually, had heard of the word avatar prior to this one, to this here today. I'm going to take a look if I can grab a couple of my my notes here. Give me a second while I bring in. I love the ability to be able to use different screens, but when you're trying to do a presentation, it's a little chaotic. So if you see me messing with my mouse a little bit and looking all over the place, that's probably because I'm trying to grab a screen to add it here. Let's see, how many of you have actually heard of the word avatar? I'm not sure if I've seen any responses here. 10 people. You could add it in the chat if the chat is available. I'm not sure. Oh, it's disabled, it says. Never mind, forget it. I see your little hands raised. I appreciate for you. If you're raising your hand, then that probably means those of you that are responding, you've heard of the word avatar in one context or another, right? So thank you for responding. But of course, in our case, we're not going to be talking about neither the game nor the James Cameron movie. In our case for today, we're actually talking about creating a customer avatar. And it's actually a thing. We began seeing the word customer avatar being brought into the marketing world and the world of communications not too long ago, around the 1970s or so, is when the people started applying this word into the world of marketing and communications. And what it is just like it's defined here by EinsteinMarketer.com. It's a detailed profile of your ideal customer, right? And so this first phrase is super important because you're talking about the word detailed. You're not just thinking a basic narrative of your customer or your target audience. You're talking about a very detailed profile, just like in the characters of a game or the characters even in the James Cameron movie, very specific, very detailed in order to really accentuate this persona, right? And the features and the traits and the characteristics that it had. And so this very first phrase is a detailed profile of your ideal customer. It doesn't make assumptions. It doesn't categorize people into groups. The avatar focuses on one person, and this is important too, one person, and it outlines everything about them, right? It goes into much greater depth than a regular marketing persona, providing marketers with many more targeting tools. Now, when you think about that for an individual, you might think, how do I identify that? Because when it comes to marketing with a company, we are pretty familiar with the fact that they have data, right? There's tons of data that is out there, that basically the algorithm will create, if you will, this virtual, this avatar for them, so that they know exactly what it is they're looking for. In our particular case, what if we don't have the data? How do we create a detailed profile of our customer if we don't have the information necessary in order to create that? That's exactly what I'd like to get into today with you, and see if I can give you a couple of strategies to be able to do that. Now, in speaking of the big players, the big companies, we know that they've been doing this for quite some time, right? Nowadays, we know that the major players, they've been using this data to narrow down specific traits of consumers in order for them to be able to better target whatever it is that they're trying to sell. So in the instance, think of perhaps like Netflix, right? And I'm simplifying all this information just for sake of time, obviously, and for better understanding to how this relates to us guys, because there's so much more to this information. But when we think about these big players, perhaps like Netflix, how do they determine what best to be able to give us in terms of what you'd like to watch next, right? Or based on your preference, or based on what you last watched, and it's able to narrow down this information for us so that we're watching the type of stuff that we'd like to see, right? Just based on some basic data that they're pulling in. Even when you create your profiles, these profiles that have these basic questions as you're entering these platforms are really created to try to help and narrow down something that they'd like to give you that you are going to like. We see it all the time with perhaps Google and your spending habits or your browsing habits is able to narrow down the information in order to give you something that's more applicable to you and your likes. Music, in the music industry, in this case, I have the example of Spotify, but we could see this anywhere. Again, they're tailoring the information that they give you, Spotify, the music that you like, based on just, your habits. Amazon does the exact same thing when it tells you or suggests, others that have purchased things similar like you have also purchased these other things that go along with the purchase, right? If you're an Amazon shopper, you see this all the time. And this is based on the big data, the data that is helping them really create this avatar consumer so that they can best provide them with what it is that they would like. Speaking of Netflix, there is a show. I don't know if anyone's ever has watched it. Maybe we could do the raise hand if the chat is still disabled. But there is a show in there that's called Black Mirror. Or the Q&A. Yeah, I don't want to bombard the Q&A, but just in your mind, respond. There's a show, Black Mirror, that if you watched it, it's very distant future based, all of these episodes, everything having to do with the technology and how it would apply to technology, and all the different things that could happen with the technology and how it's to be used. And when we talk about narrowing down information to create profiles, there's this one episode where it was like, whoa, that, I in a way, it's sort of already the case, where it's like a date, not an app, I want to call it, but it's almost like it's got a coach, and it basically is telling, the consumer that based on their prior, I don't know, there's like a profile that they create. This is the person that you'd likely, be able to date or enjoy dates. And then it sets up the dates for them, the two people. This is the algorithm, the two people, and they have to spend certain time together based on what the algorithm thinks. It's insane. Future-based completely. If you've not watched it, it's called Black Mirror on Netflix, but it has to do with exactly what we're talking about here, which is, creating profiles based on data. But in our case, of course, if we're not having to pull this data, how do we then create our avatar? How are we supposed to create an avatar? What does it take in order to be able to identify that niche or that target audience, right? Because when we're freelancing, when we're independent contractors, and even if we're internal employees with a company, we would like to put something together, whether it's information or a means of attracting someone to our product, to our service, that could be very specific, right? If anyone has read, now I'm going to forget the name of the book, but I thought it was a super book on communication, and it has to do with it's the red ocean, blue ocean strategy, and really the red ocean meaning that is where it's inundated. How do you differentiate yourself from a red ocean, right? Into a blue ocean, where the blue ocean meaning it's clear. There is not that much, not that many people. It's not inundated. It's not saturated with people. So, we talk about strategies, or they talk about strategies in this book, to be able to differentiate between being in a red ocean. That's the bloody, the gore, basically the inundation of people, everyone, in the mix, and separating ourselves into something that's more clear. How do we create that? And it's almost the same approach when we're thinking about a target audience, when we're thinking about niches and how we are able to differentiate ourselves and our service, so that somebody can say, like, oh, I want to do business with him, or I want to do business with her based on these specific characteristics. We don't have the data. We don't have the data to pull, or maybe you do, and if you do, great, you're able to pull, if you've got a way to track your data, you're able to pull some numbers in order to be able to perhaps identify who that target audience is. But what if you don't? What if we don't have that data? Creating our customer avatars might not look as fancy as James Cameron's, or some of these like real life looking avatars in the gaming industry, but we can still create our avatar, even if it's based on little stick figure like this, and trying to identify what it is that is going to resonate with our particular avatar, or with our target audience, right? We can still identify some of these things. Now, the information won't come to us. We would have to look for that information. So how do we do that? How do we create the customer avatar, that ideal client for us? There's different traits, different things that we can consider. We want to think about all kinds of different things, just depending on what it is you're trying to do, whether it is you're trying to get a message out, identify one particular type of individual, whatever it may be, you really want to sit down and narrow things down. Now, you can do, brick and mortar approach, sit down, draw a little stick figure, and, begin to identify and break down many of these things that you see here on your screen. For instance, the demographics, right? We could begin even just with that. We think about demographics in terms of, where are we trying to do our service? Where are we trying to provide our service? Sometimes we think about as large as a state. Maybe you think about, in my case, for instance, oh, we're in California, so I want to do my service in California, right? But we could really even go down further and narrow it down even further, for not just the whole state of California, but maybe you go down into, I want to work with a particular city, or I want to work with a particular county, or even just a particular town. So demographics is absolutely important in thinking about where you want to do where you want to provide your service, and where you want to be known for your particular service. So writing that down is essential, and the writing down piece is the most important part. Thinking about it isn't enough. Knowing it isn't enough. It's really creating this notion of sitting down and really writing out to describe who your avatar is going to look like, or what your avatar is going to look like. When we talk about sources of information, how is your ideal client? When you're thinking about that ideal client, how do they receive information? Is that ideal client mainly on social media receiving information? If so, do you have a professional social media platform where you're able to push out that information that your ideal client would like to see? Or is it strictly email? Or are they at conferences? You see where I'm going with this? So you really are trying to identify how your ideal client receives the sources of information that you're wanting to push out, or hoping that they see and identify or click with your name or your service. What behaviors do they do? What do they usually do? They like to hang out at Starbucks? And you may think, why would I want to jot down that much information about my ideal customer or my ideal client? But believe you me, that when it comes to creating content, creating information, knowing all of these details, even the smallest details, such as what type of behaviors our ideal client would have, is helpful in really trying to put together content for the ideal client. And as we mentioned earlier, the big companies, they're narrowing it down to the T, with spending habits or browsing habits or things like that, watching habits. All of that information does get put together so that they're very specific in how they're targeting their ads to us, the consumers. So think about this in terms of, the behavior. What age range are you looking for? Even the job titles. Sometimes, if we want to do business with a particular client, what are their job titles? So you think about, let's say, I'm interested in bringing together training for bilingual staff that are performing the duties of an interpreter, let's say, in a school district in my particular town. And so I want to identify who is in charge of training, not just training for maybe what we know as certificated staff, which is maybe your teachers or your specialists. We want training for bilingual classified staff, which is the support staff. How do I identify who I approach in this one school district for training? Maybe I need to consider what job title that is. And if I identify a job title and identify how to approach this one particular person with that job title, could I then follow with other school districts, surrounding school districts, with a similar job title or job description? You want to think about their objections. What would they have to say, right? You get ahead of what they could potentially say with regards to why they couldn't do service with you or why they don't need your service. So you get ahead of these things, you write those down, because now you're able to have a response for that. The gender, are you looking, is your ideal client particularly female based, or is it both, male and female? And if so, you want to separate, because even that gender between male, female, or whichever other we're talking about, how do they operate? How do they work? What are their, what is their personality like? Even just between two, it's very different. The level of education, the goals, this one is perhaps one of the most important in terms of how you're breaking down this ideal client. And when we talk about ideal client, I'm talking about your avatar. I'm talking about a niche. A niche is very specific, right? You're really narrowing down who it is that you're wanting to work with. So when you're talking about the sources of information, where are they receiving their information, the demographics, you also want to zone in on the pain points. This is their challenges, right? These are their challenges that they are having. And if you are coming in as the person with the solution to their problems, you have to be able to identify what types of challenges they are going through in order to be able to tailor. Well, here I go. Maybe I need some more coffee. In order to be able to tailor your approach to that specific consumer. So really understanding what those pain points are. And by pain points, All I'm referring to is the challenges that they are having. If they're unable to communicate with their limited English proficient client, then how are you able to support them? And it has to go deeper than just, I speak that language that you're seeking. You really have to be able to get into their pain points in order to identify in which way you are going to tailor that communication, letting them know that you have that solution to that very specific problem. And again, we get into really narrowing down what that looks like. So let's move further then in now that you've thought about these different things. And I'm hoping that as I'm speaking about these, you're really thinking about, your particular target audience, that whether it's that one person that you're really trying to break into, or the company, or whatever it may be, that it's making you really think about what specifics you can apply to that avatar of yours, to that customer avatar. So again, here we are, referring to the age range. You want to narrow down the age range you think your target audience falls within. And if you say, the range could be from 25 to 45, great. Now you're thinking about even more specific, these age ranges. What are their habits? Where are they hanging out? What are they doing? Your 25-year-old may not necessarily be doing the same thing as your 45-year-old, right? And so you could even narrow that down even further. It really just does depend on your communication approach and strategy. We talked about the gender and identifying, are you working with male, female? The location, where are you really wanting to base your service? If you say with anyone in the state of California, well, chances are you're not going to really hit anything with such a general statement. You really want to be able to bring that down to an even smaller demographic so that you're able to really send out communications that is very specific to that region. There's lots of times, sometimes when I'm putting something together and I'm making references to things that I feel are universal, when in fact they only exist in California. So we could very much get stuck in our little region bubble in trying to think that just because it occurs here, it occurs everywhere else. And the San Diego thing might not be the Los Angeles thing. So even that specific, getting that specific makes a big difference for creating your ideal client. What are the job titles they hold? Are they somebody in a company, or do they run the company? Is it if you're looking for someone to do business with, let's say with marketing content, who are the decision makers there that would make that decision in working with a language professional? So you really want to think about the company and think about the job title and the responsibilities, because of course, as we know, job titles don't necessarily transfer from company to company, right? And of course, one of the most important things are those pain points. What are we thinking about that are their challenges? What challenges are they facing for which you can provide solutions? And when you provide solutions, if you're coming at it with the approach of, I could be the bridge, to that language gap that you're having, well, guess what? You and perhaps 10 others behind you are providing that same type of solution. So when you are really identifying pain points, you really want to get very specific. In the example that I gave earlier, we talked about I'm looking for individuals or companies that school districts that are wanting to train their classified bilingual staff. If I wanted to get even further down, narrow it down even further, I could say they're bilingual school liaisons, or family engagement liaisons that have the responsibility of connecting with families to resources in the community. And I know that they are utilized in the interpreter capacity quite often, just due to the nature of the responsibility of their job, what their job entails. And so I've identified that I want to work with this particular school district in my particular town with this particular group of people. And so now it's made it clear as to who I need to look for within that school district that has oversight of that particular niche of people. See, so it clarifies, not just the type of person, you are approaching or wanting to approach. It also clarifies or helps you clarify your approach, because I know that if this person is, let's say, attending the national conference for bilingual education, let's just say, right? I'm just throwing out an example, random example out there. Then perhaps I want to go out there and be able to connect where they're hanging out. That's just, just an example, not necessarily. That doesn't necessarily also mean that their habits, if I know that they go to Starbucks, I'm going to go to Starbucks and stalk them. Maybe, I don't know. It just depends on what I'm trying to get at. Maybe I haven't been able to connect with them, over the phone or make an appointment. So, I'll connect with them at the grocery store. But anyway, this is it. Really what this does is, this is what it's creating for us, right? Really clarifying our approach by means of really getting to know the customer that we are trying to reach. And so this whole idea of niching down, it's not necessarily to limit the people that you can work with, because see, this is what happens. We create a customer avatar, right? We're very specific in our approach, but other people might end up getting attracted to whatever it is that we're pushing out, whatever information it is that we're sharing. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you are shutting the door. You can, if you'd like, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're shutting the door to other potential clients that don't necessarily meet your criteria. But your ideal client, when you have this person in mind, you are more intentional with your approaches because you're clear with what you're trying, who you're trying to aim at. So think about that as you're creating your avatar, your little stick figure avatar, and pointing out a lot of these different things, such as, what age range, what gender, what location, where do they get their source of information, where are they hanging out? Should I be doing the same thing? Should I be attending those webinars as well? Because this makes a big difference in the way in which you approach them and in which you approach your content. So again, why create an avatar? Well, again, remember I mentioned the avatar notion really started taking place outside of the gaming world and outside of the movies and into the marketing. And so the hype marketing says that a customer avatar, or your buying persona, is essentially a profile of the perfect customer or client. When you understand what your ideal customer is, what they look like, what their habits are, what their interests, challenges, aspirations, in fact, everything about them, you'll be much more effective in marketing to them. When I first started in wanting to put together a podcast, the very first question that came up is, who would want to listen to me, right? I'm this community interpreter out, in Timbuktu, in a school district, which is an area that is not very, it's just not very well known for language professionals. It's not a standardized area in the profession, right? In the industry, who want to listen to my podcast? Well, because of this educational background in communications and really wanting to apply all of these techniques of branding and strategizing and communication into a new project that I wanted to create, I was really able to bring it down to, I want to apply it to the Mireya that started in the profession, that fresh out of training, fresh out of school, didn't know the market, didn't understand the industry, didn't have mentors. What did she want to hear? What was she doing? I really thought about who that person was when I first started, and that was the target audience that I started with. So my content began as really trying to aim for this person that in my mind was basically the me who started back in, finishing interpreting school and entering the industry and really not knowing how to start, where to begin, or connecting with industry mentors. So when you think about that, and when you're thinking about really identifying who this person is, if you're having trouble, because it's like, how do I randomly pick and break down this person and its avatar, then think of you when you first started. Think of yourself and think of those pain points, those challenges you were having. What were you doing in order to consume information? All of those habits at least give you a foundation to begin that content that you're going to want to approach. You know, whether you're pushing out information or wanting to connect with an individual, whatever it is that your ideal client looks like, or whatever it is your approach or your intention is, this is really where you want to begin, is begin with identifying all of those different traits, all of those different characteristics. You can start with a little stick figure on your notepad, but the most important thing, as I mentioned, is you want to make sure you're writing these things down, okay? So that you can always go back and really break down what it is that you're going to do next based on these traits. So Rashid said it best: until you understand your customer deeply and genuinely, you cannot truly serve them. So make sure that, you know, I'd hopefully, it'd be great if you could show me or tag me with your little stick figure avatars and what you come up with, you know, on social media, because I'm hoping that some of this information, if you had heard it before, it serves as a refresher to be able to sit down and really create your customer avatar. And it was the first time you hear about it, well, welcome to the world of customer avatars, and hopefully you're able to get something out of this to help you in your approach in attracting the ideal client. I want to just take a moment here to really thank you for the opportunity of being here. And of course, thanking Cross-Cultural Communications. I know that I was asked to give some time for some potential questions. And so this is going to be that moment where we can go back and forth. And even if it's not a question, maybe even just a comment that you've had, if you've tried this technique before and have applied it in your approaches, what has helped you, or where have you gotten stuck? Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm going to stop my share now so that the team can come back on.
Excellent. No, that was wonderful. And I actually had a few follow-up questions. I wanted to apologize to everyone. Our chat was disabled. That's our mistake. But we do, if you have some questions, please put it into the Q&A. One of the things I really found pretty innovative is I have not in the industry really seen anyone that has presented the concept of avatar within the world of interpreting. Obviously, it's universally applicable, but I really think you're the first one to make the connection for community interpreters. I would love if you could kind of talk a little bit about, you know, Medea 10 years ago, just out of her 40-hour program or her interpreter training program. What would you do now that is different from what you did then?
The networking piece, for sure. I think if they had, so it's two parts here. Really bringing in this notion of how do you network once you get out, right? How do you connect with others in the industry so that you're able to hear their stories and kind of see what worked for them and what could potentially work for you. So it would be networking. I didn't know, I didn't understand how important it was going to be in this specific industry. In general, networking is important, but most definitely, you know, trying to network with others that are in the field and connecting with them. The second part to that would definitely be, and now how do I find clients? How do I get work, right? How do I, let's just say, you know, what is your purpose upon getting out? Had someone asked me that, one of the professors, I would have said, I would have liked to identify where to begin. Okay, so being that you're going to go for the medical field, then what are you wanting to do? Are you wanting to freelance? I didn't even understand that there was going to be a difference. There was agencies and freelancing, you know, I didn't understand
staff versus,
or being a staff. Absolutely. Yeah. So my thought initially was, I'm going to go straight into working for a hospital, right? At least that was the thought. Well, there's only 2 hospitals around here. So, and some people are less or further, right? So definitely those 2 things I think now would be something that I would, if I had that that frame of mind, I would be asking the questions of, who do I connect with? How do I connect with others in the industry? And how do I get started?
Excellent, excellent. And so we have, let's see, just going through the answers. Just give me a second. And just a quick housekeeping item for everyone. You please look for an email about certificates within about the next 24 hours for your CEUs, and we will have the recording posted on the website. And we did have a question, I missed the name, but it was specifically in terms of you've just come out of training, but you have no experience or no context for developing that, the customer avatar. So how do you actually go about kind of fleshing that out? And your answer is basically, we got to network. First thing you got to do is actually network. That's the only way to fill it out, to kind of flesh out.
Definitely. Yeah.
Something that really resonated for me was definitely thinking about the 40-hour interpreter training. And there's a segment that goes into, are you going to be a freelance? Are you going to be a staff interpreter? What do you need as an interpreter? What does that mean if you're freelance? You need business cards. Do you need a website? Do you need personal signature? And Mireya is really talking about taking it a step further. Who are we targeting? How do we target them? What's the message? So I was wondering, what are some messages that kind of resonated for you, maybe in the community interpreting world, that you've seen beneficial, maybe as you've launched Brand the Interpreter, or when you were working full time as a community interpreter? What are some of the messaging that worked within your space?
Oh my goodness. Really trying to think about narrowing some of these things down. For me, the business approach was always something that was foreign to me. And so when interpreters that have been freelancing now for quite some time, just in thinking, when you think about, I want to do this on my own and I want to freelance, it's true. That's what we're thinking about. We're thinking about some of the basic stuff, the visual components. I want to create a really nice looking business card that resembles me and my personality. But then what happens once you get the business? What about the taxes? What about getting paid? What about aligning yourself with the right agencies that are going to basically pay you in a certain way? I didn't even know that those were questions to ask. I always share an example of when I first started and I started freelancing, in the company paid me only 15 minutes because the patient didn't. I traveled 45 minutes. We were there 15 minutes. The doctor waited. The patient did not show up. And so I was told that the 15 minutes is what I was going to get paid. And they paid every 45 days. Excuse me. So I didn't know any better. These were all things that I had to learn as I went. And that was, it hurt because I was starting out, there was, that we were talking about gas money there at that point. So all of these things are things that are super important. And so right now, the messaging, if I think about it now, when I'm thinking about community interpreting and what these amazing people now that have come out and are sharing with me, I think about the Mireya that started, and just what questions do I ask, right? What am I looking for? Because I don't know what I'm looking for when I first started out. So yeah, I think that was, there's so much more, but that definitely was something that there were my pain points.
Absolutely. No, and I think that makes perfect sense. So for everyone, of course, always just off the bat, 2-hour minimum if you're doing on-site in person. But really demand it as an interpreter. So we have from Carla Houston, do you actually mean the person in charge of booking and paying for your service? Or do you mean the person you are interpreting for, or both? Or maybe my add-on, which is more important in terms of creating a customer avatar? So that's from Carla Houston.
Great question, Carla. I think, again, it goes back to what is your intention, right? Your intention as the language professional, what is it that you're trying to do? And so, and when you're thinking about the end result, well, who is that person that would make that determination of obtaining your services. It really does depend. I could tell you, for instance, when I was in the school district, many people wanted to bypass the interpreter translator and go directly to the director of the program, like let's say the English language learners director, because they manage the budget. But guess who the director would go and ask to see if this would be a right fit for the team, if not the interpreter translator. So it really just does depend on what your objective is, and you really trying to get to know and learn who that ideal client is going to be like. This is why it's not as simple as just, writing down simple traits. You really get down to identifying. In my case, in that example, the first question would have been, who really is the person that is making decisions about, let's say I'm trying to get them to purchase a cat tool, right? This was actually the example. The person called our unit to ask for the director because they wanted to convince them to purchase the cat tool. But who were the people that were going to use the cat tool? So the convincing needed to happen, at this level. And then we would go and we would say, hey, we advocate for this cat tool because we really would need it.
So the users of the cat tool the potential users needed to be convinced. They needed to show them how it could be beneficial, how it could help them in their day-to-day and make their job better. And then from there, the budget. So there's quite a lot in terms of, there's no easy answer there.
There's no easy answer. No, it really, that's why I'm saying it really does depend, and it depends on your objective. That was our example, but there's other school districts, and I keep using the school district example, but you apply it to whatever organization where the manager, the supervisor is very well versed on, the topic of translation and interpreting. And so they are able to manage these tools themselves. It doesn't necessarily have to go to the team. They can ask all the right questions and then, of course, still bring it back to the team for consideration. But it really just does depend on what your objective is.
Excellent. So we have from Nelida Gomez, Miss Maria, will you be at ATA 63 next week?
I will.
Where else can we connect with you? Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm an avid listener of your podcast as well. So Nelida Gonzalez. So you will be at ATA.
I will be at ATA. Thank you so much. Yes, and I'm on social media as well. So, and of course, you can always email me if there's something specific that you'd like. All those details Cross Cultural has posted and available for you guys.
Absolutely. It's on the website, and we'll email everyone, and it'll have Mireya's contact information. So everyone will get a copy of the video. And I did actually, so in terms of thinking about the pain points, I had this question come up. What are some of the questions you would ask about identifying pain points? Some of the questions that maybe would help you kind of explore and surface some of the challenges your potential avatars or models for your avatar would have.
Yeah, I like that. So when we think about sometimes many of the things that are very innovative, and I'm going to make it pretty broad here in terms of the example. There's this word that's thrown out there, and it's called reverse engineering, right? So they think about the end product, and then they really break it down in order to be able to identify how it was even constructed, right? And every piece to it is reverse engineered in order to be able to identify what role that piece has. When we think about our ideal client, you want to think about futuristic, just generally speaking, what is it that they're having a challenge with? So that's your big picture. And then you want to reverse engineer it from there. Most of us as language professionals, we're going to say, well, they're having their challenge is the fact that they can't communicate with limited English proficient families or, patients. So how do I reverse engineer from there? Well, we need to get deeper with that, that question. How are they having challenges? Why are they having these challenges? Because sometimes it could be a matter of I don't know, maybe if you're a trainer and they're already utilizing bilingual staff, maybe you want to be able to offer the training in a better capacity, perhaps, right? Or a better capacity type of training. So it really just depends on what it is that the area that this ideal client is in, and then really trying to break it down step by step, going down further and asking the question, well, why? Well, why? Because that really breaks it down. I mean, till you can't answer the question anymore. And you know, the part of the reason that I really like this approach is because you really do have to sit down and do your homework on this. It's not just, like I said, like a matter of just, you know, they're 25 to 35, and they like to hang out in Instagram, and they like to, you know, or go to conferences. And there's a lot more to it than that. Think about yourself as the consumer and how you act and behave with your favorite products, for instance, right? And why you do that. You know, if you really break it down, you're able to create an avatar.
Excellent. Excellent. I love that. I love that. So helpful. Here, a question from Sol Barreto. Networking is kind of random. Do you have any suggestions for how you would approach it more methodically?
Yeah, networking can be random unless you're strategic about it. So, you know, in my particular case, I know, let's say, for instance, when I was working for the school district, there were languages of lesser diffusion in the school district that we did not necessarily have support for. And so when I went and I networked, I really wanted to identify the people that I could network with for the purposes of in the event that the school district needed that language, just because I was very involved in you know, trying to tap into the service or offering the opportunity, then I would really want to connect with that person and know that, you know, there's an objective to that and why I'm connecting with them. It wasn't always about, you know, in case you needed me, it was in case I need you. But what this ended up happening was, you know, people would identify what I did and what specialty I had. And so whenever something would come up, it wasn't necessarily the language. Of course, that was important, but what stood out was the specialty, you know, that branding piece that we're talking about. What does she specialize in? Oh, she specialized. I met this person that actually is a, you know, Spanish to English interpreter, English to Spanish interpreter, and she specializes in education, and they think of me, you know. So I think the networking aspect, just again, everything is strategic. There has to be an objective. Networking shouldn't be, at least. I mean, it has its moments to network, to chit chat, but the networking piece has more to do with making connections for both your benefits, as opposed to, you know, just adding you on Instagram as a connection or something like that.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So a lot of comments. Thank you, Mireya. You're awesome. Thank you. It's been a fascinating, thought-provoking presentation. And so from Andre, what was the worst case scenario that you experienced professionally, if any, maybe as an interpreter or as a marketer?
Wow. I think as a language professional, definitely I always think about, I joke and say I have PTSD, not to say that PTSD is, you know, just not to say that it's anything light to be taken lightly, but
yeah, of course.
When I talk about, you know, PTSD in this case, and I joke about it, I say that I have it when I first started as a freelancer, because I wanted to freelance. That was my idea of being a language professional, is I wanted to be in charge of, I was a single mom and I wanted to be in charge of my schedule. And so I wanted to provide the service, great service, and freelance. But I had pretty bad experiences, such as that 15-minute, you know,
that
pay.
sounds pretty awful. Yeah, pretty difficult.
And then I went to a different company, and the other company, you know, agency, I should say, kept accruing my pay, and then I didn't get paid. So it was over $700 worth of pay. And then it was, you know, I didn't get paid, and I didn't know what to do. I think, you know, these conversations of what could happen as worst case scenario is one thing. But the other aspect to that, as a freelancer, as a person that isn't networking, that isn't connected, that doesn't have mentors, is you don't know what to do, right? As a result of that. So that was my worst case scenario. In the marketing piece, part of the reason why I like communications and branding so much, and why, I'm a self-proclaimed brand enthusiast, is because that evolves. So, you are allowed to start messy. Actually, you should start messy. It's just about starting and then evolving you and your communication strategies as you evolve as a professional. So I think that piece in the marketing, there is no worst case scenario, because I'm no longer focused in that approach. This is more of what my approach is. It just depends on you and how you've evolved as a professional, I think.
No, that's excellent. Very, very true. It's just get started, just start networking. It will evolve. Your message will evolve. You'll develop more and more experience. No, it's incredible. And I think one little tidbit for everyone, of course, is your interpreter agreement, making sure there's legal talk to an attorney in terms of your pay. Because if you worked it, if you have the documentation, you should have legal recourse. Not to provide any legal advice, but there are the resources out there, free legal resources for everyone. So interpreters, I've seen too many interpreters go through this, and it's unjust. It's a disservice to the entire profession.
Yeah.
And again, everyone, so Mireia, thank you. It's on the hour, so thank you so much. I'll hang out for any additional questions, but thank you for everything you've done in terms of the brand, the interpreter, what you bring to the profession, and for what you've shared today. Thank you for joining us today. Thanks so much. So it's always a pleasure to host you and to be able to chat with you.
Thank you, John. No, the pleasure is all mine, and thank you for having me. And again, thank you for everyone that attended. It's always a pleasure to be with cross-cultural communications and being able to talk about these things that, like you said, John, we don't necessarily hear all the time out there that has to do with our profession, but it's fun. So that's the thing, is have fun with it. So yeah, have fun with it. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate
Awesome.
it.
Have a wonderful day. Thank you, Mireia.
Thank you.